2005's Need for Speed Most Wanted was a smashing success when it was released on November 11th of that year, featuring a smooth-as-butter driving model with a well-designed map to match, intense police chases, and a simple yet engaging plot of revenge. This game went on to become the golden standard for the franchise. Despite the game's issues such as the rubber banding AI and campaign that does drag on a little given just how many Blacklist members you have to clear, the game's legacy still lives on to this day. Focusing back to when 05 Most Wanted was released, its smashing success would result in another entry being greenlit for a 2006 release. To say that this next entry had a lot of expectations to me would be putting it lightly. How would Black Box innovate from the success of Most Wanted while also making sure this game came out for both 5th and 6th gen consoles? What new story would it tell? How would gameplay mechanics be innovated? How would the pursuits be added? What extra content would be included alongside the main campaign this time? And, above all else, how would Black Box ensure that this game would be just as fun and engaging to play? The studio's response was the game that we'll be taking a look at today. Released on October 11th, 2006, Need for Speed Carbon is my personal favorite game out of this franchise. I know that for some, those are definitely going to be fighting words, especially with some of the issues that this game has, which I'll talk about later. Of course, other Need for Speed games that I've played can be really fun too, but when I think of all of the elements of what this franchise is known for, the car customization, a solid core gameplay loop, being distinct and unique among the other games for the right reasons, and more, this is the game that pops into my mind first. This game set out to innovate on what its predecessor had done through a new story, expanded customization, maintaining the pursuits, a new focus on conquering territories, bumping up the graphics, and maintaining the smooth gameplay. Starting off with what is the most important part of any racing game, the physics of the cars and the map that you drive in. Both of them need to be perfectly matched and complement one another, or otherwise the core gameplay loop will not be fun. 2012's Most Wanted is a great example of these two elements not complementing one another, and the core gameplay loop suffers as a result. Heavy feeling cars that don't want to slow down once they're up to speed and don't turn sharply, plus a city environment that asks you to dodge traffic and take tight turns frequently, equals a shit game. Thankfully, Carbon understood the assignment, as the cars in this game have a physics model designed for the city environment that they're in. The cars will brake when you tell them to, they can handle the turns in this game well, and the speed is just right to ensure that you can move fast on the straights, but not so fast that braking to turn is super difficult. Palmont itself is designed well for the cars with the turns and straights I mentioned, but it's also pretty nice to look at visually. Each of the 4 areas in the game, those being downtown, Fortuna, Kempton, and Silverton, each have their own unique vibe to them. My personal favorite being Silverton, which is akin to a Las Vegas kind of environment with all the lights, casinos, and more. Next, let's take a look at the core of Carbon's gameplay for its campaign. Carbon introduces the idea of crews to the series, groups of street racers together in a, well, crew fighting for control over the city as a whole. I don't know how everyone keeps their territories, like if there's an underground enforcement group that we're just not made aware of, or if everyone is operating on a gentleman's agreement kind of thing, but that's how things work here. It's up to you and your crew to battle for territories across Palmont, taking them over one event at a time. The game is split into 4 areas and 4 main crews, with a few smaller crews that you'll be battling against as well. The main ones that you'll be battling with are the Bushidos, TFK, 21st Street, and Stacked Deck as the final boss kind of crew. Each of them represent a new gameplay mechanic found here as well, those being car classes: tuners, muscles, and exotics. Previous games had different handling cars, of course, but it was never really emphasized. Here in Carbon, though, it is emphasized. Tuners have the best handling, exotics have the highest top speeds, and muscles have the fastest acceleration. The Bushidos represent the tuner class, TFK for the exotics, 21st Street for the muscles, and Stacked Deck as a mix of the 3. I have to commend Black Box for being able to have 3 different feeling car classes while also making sure they all still work in the layout of Palmont City and its 4 different areas. This could have easily been messed up. Either the cars could have all more or less felt the same, or specific car classes could have been rendered overpowered or entirely useless. Each of the classes have a place here, and it's up to you on how to take advantage of the car class's strengths and how to defend against the car class's weaknesses. Personally, I played through most of my career in tuners, but I did venture into the muscles a bit during the last fourth of the campaign. The tuners felt really nice around the corners, the muscles got up to speed quickly, which made things like speed trap events much easier to do, and exotics, well, I didn't drive them during my campaign run, but okay, they do seem to be the weakest car class, admittedly. But any kind of pick and choose system will have its meta and bottom of the barrel option. It's just kind of the nature of how something like this goes. Remaining on the note of the crews, you also get to pick a crewmate to race alongside you for most of the events. Every now and then you'll enter an event that has you flying solo, but for the majority of them, you have to pick a wingman. Blockers, drafters, and scouts are the available wingman types. Blockers will slam into a rival represented by the target icon above their car, wiping them out upon contact. Drafters will pull ahead to, well, draft with you, allowing you to get a speed boost once you exit the draft, and scouts will call out any and all available shortcuts along a particular route. The blockers serve their role well enough, but given you can only use them for one opponent at a time, their use is limited. They can be good for wiping out that one AI opponent who manages to stay on you while the pack is back in the distance, but other than that, like I said just now, their use is limited. Drafters I didn't use once outside of the tutorial, the reason being that for as good as Carbon's map design is, it isn't too compatible for drafting. Ideally, you'd want to draft on the straights, which are here of course, but by the time you would get the draft set up and ready for a slingshot, you'd be coming up on a set of turns that would render the speed boost from it rather mute. Scouts are by far the best type of crewmate to take with you in races, so much so that they actually break the balance of the game more often than not. Because scouts are meant to highlight and call out shortcuts to you, they have more aggressive rubber banding that causes them to be in front a lot. This means that because your scout wingman is in front of you a lot, it makes sense to take them in races so you can use their rubber banding to win events for you. Crewmates finishing first counts as a win, which makes sense as they are a part of your crew, but with the aggressive speed that scouts have, this means that for about 3/4 of the campaign, for most events, it's essentially like having an easy mode on. Part of me is happy that the aggressive rubber banding from 05 Most Wanted is now something I, as the player, can utilize here in Carbon, like the game allowing us to experience what the dark side is like. But at the same time, for as cathartic as it was to have back-to-back wins without needing to restart a bunch, I can't deny that this can break the game a little. Things like boss races, some canyon events, drift events, you're on your own there, so you still need to drive well to win the game, but for a lot of the other events, it's a matter of hitting up our boy Sal and letting him handle things from there. Interestingly enough, the AI don't have any abilities to speak of, but honestly, for the sake of having an enjoyable gameplay experience, that's a good thing. A chill goes down my spine when thinking about what dealing with a rival scout would be like. Concerning the events themselves, we have 7 different types found here. Circuits, completing a lap around a predetermined path. Sprints, getting from point A to B first. Checkpoints, where you have to get from point A to B before the time expires, with checkpoints along the way giving you time bonuses. Speed traps, where you pass by zones that capture your speed at that moment. Whoever has the highest combined speed from all the speed traps wins. Drifts, which have you drifting for points, with multipliers coming into effect for keeping a chain together. The poorly titled large-scale circuit-style event known as this, exclusive to the 6th gen console and PC versions, and lastly, canyon duels. Circuits, sprints, and checkpoints work just fine with no issues whatsoever. The speed trap events themselves are fine, they function properly and work fairly, but they can be a little annoying to deal with due to the initial hours of the campaign not being as flexible regarding your car situation through the economy. I'll elaborate more on this later. Though, with the rubber banding for your opponents toned down, you won't have as many moments where you're about to cross the finish line, only for the opponents to suddenly cross the last speed trap and beat you. There's a reason why in the 05 Most Wanted Pepega mod, speed trap events are named rubber band. Drifting events also function properly, but my goodness, the AI is super easy to beat in these levels. The main reason being, if you have a high chain going and you hit a wall, which causes your chain to end, you still keep the points and the multiplier for them. So if you have a high enough chain going, there's nothing to fear about being reckless when ending it. I would prefer a game or event type that's boringly easy rather than infuriatingly hard, don't get me wrong, but a little shove from the opponents would have been nice to see. Whenever you conquer a part of Palmont done by beating the boss in a canyon duel, which I'll get to next, a large-scale race known as a you can fill in the blank here, is held. In the context of Carbon, any new owner of a part of Palmont is expected to set this up. It's a circuit race that usually takes a bit longer to complete than a standard one due to the circuit in question being longer and more time-consuming. You get no wingman, and it's up to you to work your way from 20th to 1st place. Lastly, the Canyon Duels, the star mode of Carbon. Not found in any other Need for Speed game as of this video, Canyon Duels are the ultimate test for the current owner of a territory and the street racer looking to take it over. Canyon Duels have 2 phases to them. The first phase has you following the opponent. The closer you follow, the more points you rack up. Once you two make it to the finish line, phase 2 commences where the hunter now becomes the hunted. The closer the opponent is to you, the faster you'll lose those points you accumulated from the first phase. Cross the finish line with points remaining, and you win. If all of your points get drained before then, you lose. If you manage to overtake your opponent during phase 1 or break far enough away from them during phase 2 for long enough, you win by default. These duels are a spectacle in this game, taking place at night in a canyon with weakened guardrails that could send you tumbling to your demise if you crash through them, all while the tension is heightened as your speed breaker and NOS are both disabled, with really intense music playing in the background as well. The car's strengths and weaknesses can be shown here too. Tuners handling the turns the best, muscles getting up to speed to catch up the fastest, and exotics, well, they kinda get screwed over here since there's lots of turns and not a lot of opportunities to reach top speed. Part of me wants to see this kind of mode return in some way, but the other part of me also recognizes that Carbon's value is heightened that much more given the Canyon Duels can only be found in this game. Remaining on the note of the car classes, this is where another negative about this game needs to be brought up. Carbon emphasizes sticking with your car class for most of the campaign. Between the stringent economy, at least for the first half of the game anyway, the first crew you go up against being decided by which car class you pick at the beginning, and the ending message of the game once you beat it saying you should try the campaign again in a new car class, it's clear that this game wants you to stick with what you have. It's only towards the latter half of the game where you can expand your car collection to include different types. Although it's not a deal breaker, I do feel that this ultimately hurts the game more than it helps. The speed trap events, for example, can be a bit of a pain to get through in something like the tuner class. Because tuners don't specialize in acceleration or top speed, their speeds at the speed traps will end up being lower than normal. The solution would be to take a car meant for these kinds of events, like a muscle or exotic. But more often than not, you'll be stuck with your current class for the time being. This criticism was highlighted for me once I was made aware of the Battle Royale mod made by, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name, I will absolutely butcher it if I do. In that mod, on top of everything else that was changed, the classes were overhauled, and there's an emphasis on using the right car for the job. Of course, in the vanilla version of Carbon, you can still complete the events with any class in theory, but taking a tuner car to something like a speed trap event or a muscle car for a drift event, even if in the latter example the AI is easy to beat, is still ill-advised. Thankfully, you don't need to 100% the game and win every single event to conquer all of Palmont, but sometimes specific events can have critical upgrades that you need in order to make subsequent events easier. Speaking of upgrading, let's take a look at the customization next. For this first part about it, I need to give full credit to Racevic for pointing this out in his Need for Speed Carbon 15 years later video, the part in question being about the simplified values for upgrading your car. In lots of racing games, when you go to adjust the settings of your ride on your own, you're presented with all of these numbers and values and bars and text, and it can become overwhelming rather fast. Not to mention, anyone unfamiliar with the specific parts of the car will be left in the dark on how to piece it all together. With Carbon, rather than a whole roster of available things to toggle when you go to equip a performance part, you're instead presented with options for how you want that part to function. You can have the tires be on the drifty or grippy side or somewhere in the middle. You can have the NOS be focused on velocity, duration, or somewhere in the middle. Brakes can have a front or rear wheel bias to them, or again, somewhere in the middle. This gives people a much better idea as to what kind of car they're building. Instead of multiple numbers and acronyms and all that stuff, there are words that most people will understand and make that connection as a result. Again, credit to Racevic for this particular point. Other aspects of the customization have been expanded here too. More vinyls, said vinyls can be modified further now as well, with moving them around, scaling, rotating, and skewing. The other aspects of customization have remained here too, minus the custom gauges which are absent here sadly. Body kits, spoilers, roof scoops for the deranged among you, window tint, things like that. Your options are limited initially, but once you clear the first boss and do some more races after that, you'll be able to have your ride looking the part as well. You can also upgrade upgrade and change the looks of your crewmates' cars, though the visual customization is a little underwhelming for them since you can't edit the vinyls that are already on the car. As a result, I didn't even bother changing the looks of my crewmates' cars, though I did make sure to upgrade them. Any changes or upgrades made to a crewmate's car is free of charge, which was the right move in my eyes. Speaking of your rides, they're split up into 3 tiers, with Tier 1 being the beginning cars, Tier 2 being in the middle, and Tier 3 being the endgame cars. This is where I have to bring up another negative about this game though. At certain points throughout the game, the AI will start using better cars. This usually happens when you defeat a boss. For instance, after you defeat the first boss, all of the AI will start to use Tier 2 cars. Even with your Tier 1 car fully upgraded, you will struggle at best and get wiped out at worst. So, you'll need to buy a Tier 2 car to keep up. Or if you get lucky with a pink slip, just use the boss's car. I only got 1 pink slip out of the career. My luck in that regard was shit. The problem with that is there will sometimes be things that happen that you're ill-equipped for and can't back out of without facing consequences. What I mean by that is, take for example when your territory gets challenged. Throughout the game, your territories will get challenged by some of the smaller crews. It makes sense for other crews to be able to challenge areas that you own, but when you defeat a boss, for instance, all of the AI automatically has upgraded cars. Meanwhile, you still have a slightly inferior car because you have yet to upgrade your own ride. But when you then get challenged before those upgrades can take place, that's where the issue comes up. If you decline to race, that territory automatically gets handed over to the challenging crew, meaning in order to be able to have a fair race against them, you have to give up that specific event so you can apply the upgrades, then challenge them to reclaim that area. If there was an option to postpone the challenge rather than fully declining it so you could upgrade your ride after the AI upgrade checkpoint, for a lack of a better way to put it, then this wouldn't be an issue. It also doesn't help that some frustration is directed at this gameplay mechanic regardless of upgrade checkpoints because of just how often it happens with little to gain from it. You get a minuscule amount of money for winning these defensive events, and the only other thing that these are good for is completing a challenge card, specifically the 20 defensive event wins as part of the challenges needed to unlock Cross's Corvette. It comes off as just padding out the runtime since the rewards for winning a defensive race are so pathetically low. This is made even worse when you might need to escape the police after an event like this, which, fun fact, I almost forgot to talk about the cops in this game. That's not good. Unfortunately, in what is probably the biggest negative directed towards this game, the police and their pursuits have been massively toned back from how they worked in 05 Most Wanted, to the point that the Palmont police are just there to escape from every now and then, rather than the department being something to mess around and play with. Because there is no bounty system, nor is there anything to replace it to give us a reason to interact with the police, outside of some reward card challenges, there is no reason to get into chases with the cops. The downright revolutionary pursuit system found in the previous game got a slap to the face here on Carbon. Functionally, the pursuits are identical. Even the radio chatter has the same voice actors and similar callouts and such. Regular cruisers at heat level 1, undercover ones at heat level 2, state and undercover state cars at heat 3 and 4, and then the feds get involved at heat 5. Most of the gameplay mechanics are still here, minus the helicopter that doesn't spawn in this game, but again, you hardly get anything for prolonging a pursuit, which means that the best practice is to end a pursuit and get out of dodge ASAP every time. I will admit, it is cool to see everyone splitting up and dispersing at the end of a race that's been intercepted by the police. That's the one positive I'll give the pursuits in this game. That happened with 05 Most Wanted as well, but because there are more cars in Carbon's events, everyone splitting up and getting out of dodge is much more noticeable. Moving on to the story. First and foremost, I'm not going to spoil anything here. It's not the greatest story ever written, but because I think that this game is still worth playing despite the flaws it has, I'll refrain from spoiling anything. This game is a sequel to the events of Most Wanted. Before the events of the previous game, your character used to street race in Palmont City, part of a crew led by a man named Darius. When a big street race gets busted by the police, you were the only one to escape, but the bag that was supposed to house the prize money was empty. You're told to leave Palmont, which you do, leading to the events of Most Wanted. After you leave Rockport City, you return back to Palmont, where after your ride gets totaled by Cross, who got fired by the Rockport PD for failing to stop you, and is now a bounty hunter, Darius comes in to save you at the last second. As thanks for Darius saving you, you're working for him once again, aiming to conquer all of Palmont City to stomp out the other crews. The characters are a mixed bag. Characters like Darius, Cross, and Nikki, for example, are all great, with great acting with both the green screen cutscenes and in-game audio. The additional wingmen you get during the campaign, although they have minimal screen time and lines in comparison to the main characters, did well with the material they were given too. Meanwhile, the leaders of the other three main crews, Kenji, Wolf, and Angie, are just pitiful. Not the actors themselves, they all did the best they could with the lines they were given, but God, these in-game characters are just pathetic. The way they all try to intimidate you is laughable.
I don't know what's more pathetic, your crew or your car.
And their responses to you beating them is also laughable.
I let you win.
Look, I'm not saying that 05 Most Wanted's cutscenes are the greatest things ever, but there's a reason we all remember Razor. Whereas with Carbon's antagonists, they're all bark but no bite, Razor has some bite to him. At the end of the opening prologue where he acquires your ride and taunts you about it, that sticks with you. This guy just pulled a dirty trick to beat you. That's your ride he stole. Meanwhile in Carbon, it's just...
So, money.
And then they show up one more time before f***ing off far into the distance until you challenge them. Sound design wise, this game is really solid. I will admit, the licensed music became a bit of a blur, so I can't really give my thoughts on it. The original score composed by Trevor Morris, though, is so good. Part of why things like the canyon duels are as intense and fun as they are is because of the music. The tracks that play during regular events themselves are really good too. Though because there are only a few of the regular race music tracks, they will become background noise sooner or later. Whereas with the canyon duels, because of the gaps in between them, that music will stand out more. Other aspects like the car engine, smaller things like the menu sounds, they're all great too. Though I do have a pet peeve with the tires, they make lots of noise even when you're not even steering that hard. It never got annoying to the point of me wanting to quit or mute the audio, but it did get just a tad bit annoying to listen to after a while. As a final thing to note on this game's sound, the pursuit music done by Paul Linford in 05 Most Wanted is reused here, which for someone like me who loves those tracks, is a good thing. Too bad I didn't hear it a whole lot though, given we don't really have a reason to interact with the Palmont PD. Outside of the campaign, there's an option for quick play races, you've got a challenge series that unlocks unique customization options upon completing them, and there's the previously mentioned challenge series where you have to complete certain tasks in the campaign to unlock new rides, parts, etc. Overall, Need for Speed Carbon is a very solid game. Yeah, it's got some negatives attached to it for sure, and I can totally see why people would say that this game was the start of Black Box's downfall. I can also see how people would think that I'm crazy for calling this game my favorite and not 05 Most Wanted. Despite the game's flaws, Carbon manages to improve the core gameplay loop to make it more refined, even if we've dropped from 60 to 30 FPS on consoles at least, and I personally think the concept of crews battling for territory still has a place in Need for Speed. It's just a matter of going more in-depth with the idea should something like what Carbon did ever make a return in the future. If you have yet to play this game yourself, I would recommend that you give it a try. Of course, with how old the game is, it might be best to look for it through other means, if you know what I'm talking about, but if you're able to / want to seek out an original copy of the game, that version still runs and plays great too.